Well, hi, David. Lovely to have you with me today for How to Live Well, this Heaven and Healthcare podcast. And we're going to talk, broadly speaking, about the subject of the interaction of faith and medicine today. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Well, you probably know me best of all.
I know you reasonably well.
So I'm Dave, I'm Pete's son, and I work as a GP and also work here at Eastgate as well. So I feel privileged to have two jobs that I like, both one in healthcare, one for the church, and enjoy seeing God work through both those fields, really. And that's partly what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
Yes, that interaction of faith and medicine, which some people find a bit confusing, don't they? So we'll try and explore those ideas. But thought we might just start our conversation a bit with a story from our good friend Patrick. And you and I have talked about that. And actually, we did a recording of a conversation with Patrick previously. And so Patrick and I have had a conversation that's gone out on one of the earlier Heaven and Healthcare podcasts about his amazing story, really. And I just thought I'd bring you in on that because there's a lot of lessons to learn from that. And I know we'd have some fun talking with Patrick about it.
There is. I mean, there's a bunch of lessons you can learn from that. I think there's some of that where you go, that might well be a one-off. I've never heard anything like that before. I think what I really found great and what I think we did was celebrating success for Patrick at every step along the way. Yeah. So when we first knew him, he was reliant on dialysis, and we were grateful for the intervention of the health service and the medical world at that stage. Yes. And then there was one Sunday morning, I think, when he told us that he was, or we heard the news that he was receiving a kidney transplant.
It was actually a Sunday evening, actually. It was Sunday evening at the end of, we had Joaquin with us, Joaquin Evans, our friend. Yeah. So, and then he was actually called in for his kidney transplant, actually, that night, having... that day we prayed for him to get a new kidney, and
So again, we celebrate that. That's an amazing thing. That's God's provision through the healthcare service. That's a new kidney, and then it goes on further with Patrick's journey of faith into gradually reducing down medication to the point where he's no longer reliant on immunosuppressives, which is again miraculous in and of itself. So it was just celebrating that at every point. When we heard he was getting a kidney transplant, over the moon and really joyful about that. And without that, you don't have the rest of the story. The rest of that miraculous journey wouldn't have occurred without that step, really. But then Patrick, having heard very clearly from God, then took further steps, and I can now rejoice that he's not on immunosuppressive medicine. That's been particularly relevant over the last 18 months with COVID, meaning that he's been able to enjoy a level of freedom through the goodness and the miraculous grace of God, and celebrate all of that.
Yeah, and it's an extraordinary story, isn't it? But I think for some Christians there is this struggle of where does faith and medicine fit together, and we use the story of Patrick to say actually, it flows through the whole story. Yeah. But I think some Christians are concerned about, is it a lack of faith if I have to go and see a doctor? Am I not trusting God enough? Is there something that I'm lacking, or is there something wrong with me? And almost sometimes a bit of shame or guilt attached to going to a doctor because I should be a Christian. And again, we talked about this in another previous podcast, particularly with mental health, but also in the realms of physical health. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think sometimes there's the misconception that you should only be relying on God for our health, and that God can't work through the health service. And I think my take is you wouldn't apply that thinking to any other aspect of life. If you've got a burst pipe in your house, you wouldn't regard it as a lack of faith to call a plumber. At least I would hope not.
I might pray first, and if God fixes the pipe, great, wonderful.
If not, I'm calling the plumber. We've got a great example. Mutually shared our mechanic.
Yes, Mick, beloved mechanic.
Mechanic Mick, featured in your book. Yes. And we would regard him as one of the blessings of God in our lives over the last more than 30 years.
Absolutely, a real provision of God to us as a family. And
tended our cars, and he's just retired, and so we've celebrated him. I'm also feeling a very big hole in our family provision in terms of what do we do with our cars next. But we've always had the thought we trust God to provide for us. had cars given to us as a family. I know you have. We've had cars given to us. Me and Joe, and we trust that God is keeping us safe and well in that, but also feeling perfectly happy to accept help from someone else with the relevant expertise and regarding them as a blessing of God in our lives. So, we would not regard it unusual, and I don't think anyone would, that you take your car in for its annual service so that you hope that you're keeping it in good nick.
Yes.
Some people with knowledge of the kind of cars that we've driven might still doubt that, and we've never had particularly high value on, would we say, high-performance vehicles, have we?
It's not high priority in the car households.
I can still remember helping you bump start the Metro when I was a teenager. But so you take that in, you trust that for expertise. You wouldn't regard that as a failing in any way. But then there's also times where I think I've seen the direct miraculous intervention of God in that particular example. So me, Joe, and our kids were driving to Soul Survivor. We were driving our car up the M1 and pulled in at the service station, filled up with petrol, got back in. Engine wouldn't start. And we're like, okay,
that's not a good spot.
We're already 2 hours from home and 2 hours away from Soul Survivor. We're supposed to be leading the youth group. We're supposed to get there ahead of them. And we've got 2 small kids in the back. And now our car won't work. Like, all right, kids, we're going to pray. And lay hand on the dashboard. Car started.
Yes.
And so, I've seen the miraculous there. But I don't regard it as a lack of faith that I've also taken the car to the mechanic.
No, and then when you got back from that, I took it to Mick to check it out.
Yeah, I did. Mick, something funny happened with this on the way up the M1. Would you mind having a look?
Yeah, you could have just hoped it won't happen again and trusted God. But actually, it's not a lack of faith, is it, to engage with other people who are gifted in certain areas of life to help us, like a plumber or a car mechanic. But somehow the realm of medicine somehow seems different for some people in their minds. And it's difficult to understand fully why when you're a doctor, but actually there seems to be, I guess that there are verses in the Bible that anything that doesn't come from faith is sin. So people are concerned. Actually, I had a conversation with somebody recently. He said, would it be sinful if I took a surgeon's advice? Am I abandoning God? I'm thinking, no. And I would say it was somebody who was actually risking their health on because she was caught up in this idea. I thought somehow she would be almost abandoning God to take that advice. So I would help. And I think we have this problem here, but it's like this secular sacred divide that exists. That's from God, that's not. Whereas that's not how God's made the world, is it? No,
not at all. And I think, like you say, it's around partnering with God in faith, whatever aspect you're doing that in. And there are some times when God gives you a very, very clear steer on that, like he did with Patrick, and then there was a very clear reason for going that route that he took. Sometimes God prompts you, has prompted people, with the healing centre here at Eastgate, sometimes God has prompted people, you need to go there.
Yes.
Sometimes God doesn't always give you the absolute clear steer, and there's not always an absolute, writing in the sky, right or wrong answer. But if you are trusting in God when you are interacting with the medical world, you can still do that in faith.
Yes.
And actually, regarding those people as saying, there's a reason God created community. And right from the get-go, the design Garden of Eden, it's not good for man to be alone. And he's designed people to interact with one another. You see this within the church model. No, one body, many parts. No one person has all that you need. That's why you need the other people around that. And I believe God has set society up in a similar way, actually, in that saying, I do this so that you can realise that you are not all self-sufficient, I think in some ways, but also so that you have the blessing of interacting with other people. And because of that, we've worked in the health world, you've worked as a GP, I still work as a GP, going, hey, I get to be the blessing of God to people who come in.
Yes.
And there's some people I've seen healed, or broke through miraculously. There's probably a greater proportion of people that I've seen helped with, medication for their blood pressure, or antibiotics, or antidepressants, or a variety of different things, or even just sometimes some advice, because God has gifted people with a degree of expertise.
Yeah, I love it. I think we would clearly have the opinion. It's stated throughout these podcasts that medicine is a gift from God, directly aligned with the purposes of heaven of alleviating sickness and suffering. It seems the purposes seem to correlate. And like you, I would say I've prayed for many people, seen many miracles. That you would class as acts of God, definitely, but I also believe that there's an act of God that happens through the medical knowledge that I've got, and applying that, and that many people's lives are being affected and even saved through the application of the medical knowledge I acquired, likewise with you. And I think the knowledge is from God, isn't it? God He knows all things, and I think it's one of the ways we worship God with our minds is the use of our minds. And I think probably it's people are far more accepting of the creative minds, like music. God could lead the worship, couldn't He, in our meetings? He could. He'd be the best musician ever, probably. Yes. But actually, we readily accept the gift of music and musicians.
Yes, you and I accept those gladly on the grounds.
Very gladly.
That's not our skill set.
I think God could turn up and lead the worship, but we don't expect Him to. Do you see what I mean? I think we somehow divide up the bits and pieces of life, and I think it is. I think it's because there's the enemy attack is upon health and well-being, so much so that this confusion is out there. Now, you've got a great biblical example we were talking about from Acts chapter 27.
Paul. So I think if you want that, I think a great example of someone who was both acknowledged, in his safety and in his the way that God would preserve his life, acknowledge both the completely miraculous and the everyday and the help from other people. So Acts 27, this is before the shipwreck at Malta, and there's the massive storm and the boat's in trouble, and Paul spots that a bunch of the sailors are about to jump ship and take the life raft and head off. And he says to the captain, "You best stop that because we're going to need those guys." It's probably a good idea that the ship has some competent sailors who know what they're doing. And so the captain actually cuts the life raft off, doesn't he, I think? And the sailors stay on board. And that sees them through that bit of the storm.
Yes.
They're then shipwrecked, and God's hand is in not one person being lost.
Person, it's great.
And then they wash up on dry land, and then shortly after, the building a fire, snake jumps out and bites Paul on the hand, and everyone thinks, he's done for, he's going to die. Yes. That was immediately, there wasn't any doubt in their minds, thinking, oh gosh, that's a poisonous snake, and die. Paul just shakes it off, trusts that God's got that covered, and he's fine.
Yes.
So you've got that amazing miracle where Paul just goes, no, I'm not having that. I'm trusting that despite that, that life-threatening circumstance, God's got me protected. But that didn't stop him, a day or so previously, saying, actually, I'm going to need some help from some people here in this situation. Please don't let the sailors jump ship, because otherwise we're all in trouble.
Yeah.
And so you can have that. You can have that emphasis where we're going, I trust that God will preserve me, and there's going to be circumstances where I'm going to see amazing miracles. But there's also times where God is going to help me through the practical, and often, I think that will involve other people, because that's what God has put in place. And that's where I see within the medical world, I trust that God will, protect my life, and we see amazing, healings. But also trust that God has put the medical world there to be a blessing. And I think as well, increasingly, if we're talking on how to live well, there's been a useful shift in over a number of years now around aiming for good health rather than just treating bad health.
Yeah.
And so people are sometimes wary of, if I go to the doctor, I can only go to the doctor if there's something really wrong, or there's the equal fear of, if I go to the doctor, it might confirm that something's wrong, that's the other trap that people can fall into. Whereas now there's much more of an emphasis on, different over the last 18 months have been more crisis mode, but hopefully we'll get more back to what we call preventative medicine. I've got a patient who comes in to see me once a year saying, I feel completely, nice chap in his 70s, says, I feel completely well. What do I need to do to keep feeling this way? And so we have a chat. I check his blood pressure. We check his cholesterol, his blood sugar. I can advise him, your cholesterol's up a little bit this year. We might need to consider that. There are a range of options. There's some things that you can do. There are medications that I can offer. And we have that discussion because both of us have got the same aim. We want this man to stay well and healthy and enjoy the next 10, 15, 20 years of his life. So he's coming to me with that idea, and it's great because he's not coming in fear or worry. He's coming saying, hey, I think you can help me stay well.
Yes.
And I'm like, I'm really blessed by that.
I think if we get that as a great way of putting it, is if we aim at well-being, which for everybody, so we want everybody to enjoy well-being as fully as they possibly can, and the multi different aspects of that we're considering. But there's an illustration I use have over the years, which people I think have found helpful. Is like, say right now, you're telling me you've got a headache, and my first immediate response is, I'm going to pray for you. But if in 20 minutes' time you say, my headache is still really bad, I'll say, well, let's take some paracetamol. I've got some paracetamol in my pocket, take these. If then, in an hour's time, your headache's gone, I'm happy that your headache's gone. I'm not wondering, was it my prayers that worked, or did I have a lack of faith to give you paracetamol? I think, my rejoicing is in the fact that you're in your well-being. And I think this is where Christians try that. Often need an explanation. Was it the medicine? Was it prayer? Was it? And I say it's all. If you accept it all as a gift from God, then you're far more likely to enjoy the well-being. And
I think there's sometimes the downside. We're saying, if I accept the medical care, I can't give the glory to God for the healing. God wants you to be well. So compassion and faith we've talked about as the key elements, both in supernatural healing, but I think can also tie into your interaction with the medical world. You are, at the end of the day, you want people have compassion to say, actually, I want you to be well. And greatest compassion doesn't look for, who gets the credit for this? Can I look cleverer for doing that? You get this sometimes the other way. Doctors aren't perfect, where people come in and go, and you've given a course of treatment, and patient comes in, going, hey, I'm better. And you're like, great, was it my medication? They're like, no, I didn't take that. And what the doctor has to do is and what I do, and I think we do, is celebrate, hey, you're well. And actually, that's the main thing for me. I wasn't looking for the credit. It's always quite nice if someone comes in going, hey, you did this and I'm better. Like, that's nice, warm, fuzzy feeling. But that can't be our go-to or what we need to be relying on. It has to be the compassion of going, my main desire is that you are healthy and well, and that you are free to enjoy fullness of life. And however that happens, that's okay. Yeah,
and I think one of the ways I found that probably the best way to approach this is that I'm glad I was part of that story. Do you see what I mean? But I'm part of the story. And rather than claiming the whole story for medicine, or claiming the whole story for prayer, thinking, wow, look at this, the outcome of all these things is, and now we're celebrating your well-being. And I think also the other thing I think is a tip for people listening to this is actually being thankful. Actually, as you thankful for all the contributing factors towards well-being. So if you go to see doctor, physio, health worker, whatever, actually go with that attitude of gratitude to God, number one, for the provision of these people, but gratitude towards the people, rather than it's almost a guilt, shame for having needed them. And I think that will turn up that mindset around and start to break that secular sacred divide. And it's one of the things we've done here at Eastgate. We've actually tried to teach the whole church congregation to be thankful when they interact with the medicals and express it, because actually that's quite a powerful thing to encourage the medical world as well. And
gratitude makes a huge difference. And I think fortunately, a lot of the time, when interactions with the public and with patients, people do express gratitude and thankfulness. I would say, it's good for everyone's well-being. It's good for the well-being of the doctor, but we don't do that just to be nice to the doctor, although you should. But that's also good for ourselves as well, in that cultivating that attitude of thankfulness, of gratitude, it combats bitterness. It combats pride. Combats a lot of things. It is good to have that as a lifestyle practice. It is good for your overall well-being, and being able to use that towards the medical profession actually allows you to access that as well in a positive way.
Yes, I think because literally there are thousands and thousands and thousands of Christians who work in the healthcare sector within the UK, and many thousands. Yeah. And I think it's really, really important that they realise that what they're doing is actually acknowledged as great Christian service. This is how they give their lives. Because I think that'll help everything come together. And one of the things we want to do with Heaven in Healthcare is encourage and inspire all healthcare workers, from your hospital cleaners, your GP receptionists, your consultant surgeons, physios, nurses, whatever, care workers, to feel that they're on this, I would feel like a godly service together towards humanity, and to feel celebrated. I think that's another thing within the church context rather than vilified, which is a sad reality sometimes, not hopefully not too often.
Yeah, fortunately not common in my own personal experience. No. I think partly that's because this is my church, and we've always held medicine and faith as being partners together, really. Yes. So I think that's fortunate. But I think partly of our role, what we've seen, is to help people to overcome some of the barriers that stop people kind of accessing that. Not just because, hey, we're championing the world of medicine, although we're both passionate about that, but also saying, if we help to break down some of those barriers, we are allowing people to benefit from that. Yes. And if those barriers remain up, there are avenues to people's well-being that they are not accessing. Yes. And so again, out of compassion for people, we're wanting to say, hey, we can help you to get this, because there are traps that people fall into sometimes in their thinking, aren't they? So we've talked about is seeing a doctor a lack of faith. Say no. You have to be careful that you are still staying close to God and taking each step in faith. Yes, because that's important. But the activity of seeking medical help, physio, nursing care, anything like that, can be the blessing of God on you. But there's also there are a range of different beliefs, and these are not unique to Christians. These are actually common in the general population, where sometimes there's that fear of going to the doctors sometimes people are worried that they've got something, but there's that fear, I can pretend I don't have it at the moment. If I don't see a doctor, it doesn't get diagnosed, and I won't know. Yes, which that itself, that tends to not be a faith-driven thought process, because that's more fear that's guiding that kind of kind of thinking, where people, that's more a stick your head in the sand kind of thought. Yes. That's not a. Occasionally people will go, actually, no, I've heard very specifically from God, and no, this is fine. But often it's I won't go to the doctor because of fear. Yes. And actually, as soon as you've identified that, you're going, actually, no, that's not a God-driven process. No. Because God doesn't work through fear.
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. There's a lot of people who are fearful of the diagnosis, and delay medical help, and then come up with reasons why they delay it. And I think you can even Christianise that sometimes. I would call it something like, okay, well, therefore, no, I'm going to exercise faith in this area and not go to the doctor. Yeah. And you think, well, is that faith or was it fear-based? And I think trying to distinguish between those is very helpful. Yeah, and then sometimes people don't want don't want a label, as they call it. Yep. A diagnosis, as we would call it. Because there sometimes can be a shame as well, where going, actually, if I have a diagnosis, and again, people don't have to tell other people what they're diagnosed with, but if other people find out, other people might think, they have high blood pressure or depression or diabetes or things going, people are worried that they will then be judged by other Christians, I think, sometimes, of going, well, you have that, therefore that must be a lack of faith. Yes. And we have to break through that rubbish kind of straight off. And I was thinking about that actually even the last couple of days, where Jesus was asked the question, oh, this guy's blind. Was it his sin? Was it his parents' sin? What was it? And you said, no, none of these.
None of the above.
Let's not attribute blame, to ill health, because that's another side of things that comes with it, isn't it? So yeah. Actually, there's also another story, but just before we land this, is I love the story that you talked about with an Ebola outbreak in Africa, and you had some friends who were thinking of going to that place.
Yeah.
I love this story.
Well, it's, friends from different church, other environment, who had links with churches in country in Central Africa, and were keen to go out and support that church, and had been out previously. But the current advice, the government health advice and national travel advice was do not travel because there was an Ebola outbreak. And someone came to me and said, "Oh, well, we feel we should still go because God will protect us." And surely we're invulnerable was almost the thinking in this. And I was like, I just asked. I said, did you lock your door when you came out tonight? And looked at me, what's that got to do with it? Well, you would trust God to protect your home. Mm-hmm. You would also take what seems to be just the sensible, straightforward measure of common sense of going, you know what? I will lock the door when I leave the house. Yes. And faith is not or walking with Jesus is not a blank check to recklessly disregard all common sense and all medical advice. So I said, and then again, I think it's very different. None of this can be a universal rule, can it? Because it always has to be, what is God saying?
Yeah, like Patrick's story, you're thinking.
Yeah. So if Patrick had come to me beforehand saying, I'm going to stop all my medication, I would have gone, no, no, don't do that.
Help.
But God guided him very, very specifically in that time. Whereas in this instance, I thought, actually, I'm not feeling a particular dramatic prompt from God at that time. We have some very clear, sensible advice that is there to protect your health and also the health of others.
Yes.
I would suggest not to go.
Yeah. Actually, got another, just a very simple one. Just going. I think most people don't regard brushing their teeth as a lack of faith, do they?
I hope not.
But actually, that's medical care. That's looking after your care. That's advice to you. And I'll brush my teeth in the morning, do it twice a day. I think most people think, that's a lack of faith to brush my teeth. But it's just a simple illustration, like you're saying, of actually that. So that's been a great conversation, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with me today.
Yeah, pleasure.